Hello, this is Stephen Newhand reading Chapter 1 Trillion. We need to leave Mars. We need to launch today, one of the holographic heads shouted. Trillion von Nickel found herself disagreeing with the floating head, although she knew his opinion that didn't carry much weight. It was Peter's opinion that mattered ultimately. He was the one footing the bills. Peter, what do you think? Dr. Peter Atreus was almost 90, but he didn't look it. She secretly wondered if it was because he was rich enough to afford any type of cosmetic surgery he wanted, or because his dark skin also gave him an advantage over some of the other team members, whose lighter skin meant that they looked twice his age, despite being half his age. Trillion thought he was living proof of the saying, black don't crack. Peter looked down, as if he was unsure about what he was about to say. Just because Earth elected a Luddite doesn't mean we have to leave Mars today. Trillian shook her head at that comment. It always amused her when her colleagues used the word Luddite. She found it ironic that earlier today she had to wheel in a large screen to project Peter's face onto, just because he refused to have the holographic projection recorder installed into his home office. Peter, let's not call them Luddites. I'm sure, to them, we're the Luddites. Atlas turned his head towards her. What should we call them, then? He challenged. She shrugged, not wanting to get into this argument again. Never mind. Atlas was one of the 4 people physically present in the room with her. He was almost as old as Peter. The two of them had worked together for almost a decade, bringing this project together. Atlas spent years in AI research, writing systems and interfaces for interacting with artificial intelligences. But something caused him to leave that line of research, and he had switched to mechanical engineering. Ever since then, he'd been cranking out inventions that Peter commercialized. She watched Peter's mouth move, but no sound was coming out. You're on mute, old man. The red mute button disappeared from his screen. There is nothing to fear in the Fermion Party. As with all political parties, they had to use extremist language to please their voter base. They might be the biggest political party on Earth, but this is Mars. She could understand half the group's fear. Everyone on the conference call would eventually become a von Neumann probe, and stopping them was one of the campaign promises the Fermion Party had made. It was true that they all hated the Fermion Party, but there wasn't much that they could do. Besides, she didn't want to leave yet. She hadn't said goodbye. She wasn't ready. The arguments began to get heated. Even Icarus started yelling at Peter. Those are not extremist beliefs anymore, Dr. Atreus. We must accept the fact that these views are now mainstream political views on Earth. Killing Mars is now a mainstream talking point. Icarus was a short Japanese man. He was one of the others in the room. Seated beside Trillian was Icarus, Atlas, and Angelique. All 4 of them were scheduled to monitor the Isaac Arthur Mars base over the weekend. They were called Beta Explorers. They would be one of the first explorers out of the solar system. Peter raised his hands, quieting the room. Calm down, everyone. The atmosphere in the room was getting intense as different people began yelling on the call. Trillian tuned out, only hearing bits and pieces of it. I won't calm down. Yes, it's unlucky that they can't afford to visit another planet. That doesn't mean they have to stop us from traveling. Atlas, don't get prejudiced. Peter, I'm not prejudiced. I'm just honest. This is exactly why we need to launch the colony ships ASAP. If we don't have independent colonies of humans, then we are at risk of lunatics like this destroying us. Trillian suddenly stood up. She could see Peter speaking, but she wasn't listening to his words. A man had appeared in the background holding a gun. Trillian pointed at the screen with urgency. Dr. Atreus! Dr. Atreus! The room went silent as everyone noticed the man, helpless to do anything. They could see everything, hear everything. The gunman was unaware he was on camera. "Peter, you are breaking multiple treaties outside of the metaverse," he said darkly. "You left us no choice." Peter spun around. "You have no authority here," he bellowed in surprise. How did he have a gun? Trillian thought to herself. Guns weren't allowed on Mars. Dr. Atreus, the gun isn't real. There are no guns on Mars. Peter must have realized it, too. He was slowly walking towards the man, hands raised slightly as if surrendering. The man had quite a speech, but she had heard it all before. All those crazy fermions believed the same thing. If life was, we would have been visited by aliens already. You know this, Peter. You know the answer to where are all the aliens is that they're in the metaverse. There are an infinite number of virtual worlds. Why the obsession with this one? Peter was enraged now. You mean the real world? He shouted, lunging forward. The two men wrestled for a moment, the man with the gun clearly stronger. They fell to the floor and rolled out of view of the camera. Bang. The gun went off. Everyone gasped. Trillian's brain moved 1,000,000 miles an hour. What had just happened? Was Peter shot? She was in shock. She heard voices shout out for Peter. Peter! 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 Dr. Atreus! Peter Atreus! Director! Trillian's voice was drowned out by everyone speaking out at once. The connection to the video call disconnected, and the holographic images of everyone disappeared. It was just the four of them in the conference room now. Icarus stood beside Trillian, holding his phone up in the air as he tried to get reception. My phone just lost signal. Trillian looked at the three of them in shock. How did they get guns on the Mars? Guns are illegal here. Who would use a gun when you're in the vacuum of space? Icarus pointed at his head, as if to say only crazy people. Someone who didn't care about the consequences of holes in space. Someone who isn't planning on being here long. Someone from not around here, Angelique added. All three of them looked towards Atlas, all knowing what this meant but not wanting to voice it. They knew that these people were from the Fermian party. They also knew that they didn't have much time. If they had taken out Peter, the rest of them were next. Atlas pulled something out of his pocket. We planned for this team. Peter did not believe it would happen, but it looks like they're moving in on us. He handed it to Trillian. It was a key card. Take this. It will get you into my office. There's a safe in the corner. Behind the sheets, embedded into the wall. Open it. You'll find 12 soldered plastic boxes about the size of matchsticks. These are the two-factor authentication codes. Grab the one with each of our names on them. Open the boxes. There will also be a pair of in-ear buds. Put those on. Then bring the boxes back to me. Take your trash with you. Meet Angelique and me at airlock F-27. Trillian looked at him incredulously. What are you going to do? We're going to get our spacecraft ready, Atlas said with a smile. Just then, the door to the conference room swung open, revealing a man with a gun. He pointed the gun towards Atlas, Icarus, and Angelique, unaware that Trillian was standing behind the door, out of view. All three of them raised their hands. As the gunman slowly walked into the room, Trillian knew that the gun was real. She no longer questioned the need to leave Mars today. At that moment, she knew she had to stop the gunman. They had to leave. She steadied herself, knowing she had to do something before he saw her. She drew in a deep breath and lunged towards his arm in an attempt to knock the gun out of his hand. She managed to get one hand on the barrel of the gun, her momentum carrying her forward as she slammed into the door. She kept her grip on the gun, but the man would not let go. Somehow she managed to wedge his hand in the door. The man yelled as Trillian's weight slammed the door into his arm. He finally let go of the gun, and Trillian fell, the gun still in her possession. Icarus and Atlas pushed up against the door, wedging the man's hand in place. It was likely broken, given the obvious pain he was in. Angelique helped Trillian up. "Are you all right?" Angelique was the youngest in the group, but she was one of the hardest working people she knew, which made it shocking when she found out that Angelique used to work in real estate. The only thing Trillian disliked about Angelique was her ginger hair. Trillian had red hair, a much brighter shade of red, too. Trillian disliked the fact that having two people on the team with red hair meant every time the two of them walked into the room together, it was the first comment people made. She hated that. A few minutes later, the team had gathered themselves. Trillian held onto the gun as they opened the door. "Who are you?" she demanded, pointing the gun at the stranger. He stared blankly, clutching his hand. Angelique cracked. She kicked his broken arm. "You killed Pete!" The gunman started talking after that. He was 23, maybe 24, young, filled with hatred, filled with extremist views. They interrogated him, but he didn't know much. He was part of the Fermions. It was a full-on attack of Mars. They had hacked into the satellite systems, shut off all internet access. They learned that he was to move them into the prison cells and wait for further instructions. The man guessed that they were to be transported back to Earth. He wasn't very useful for learning more about the plan, but he was full of derogatory terms, calling them names, trying to argue that humanity had already ruined Earth. It didn't need to go and ruin other planets. The team tied him up and removed his phone and watch. Atlas reiterated the plan. "We need to move fast. We don't know how many of these people there are." The team took off.
Hello, my name is Tavis Leeds. I'm reading Chapter 2, Atlas, Preparing the Spaceship. Atlas and Angelique left the room first, resisting the urge to run in case they encountered something around a corner. The base was deserted. As they made their way down the hall, Atlas wondered how someone had managed to get into the base at this time of night. Why is the world so crazy right now? Angelique looked at Atlas. It's the pace of change that is making the world go crazy. We haven't seen this much innovation since the Industrial Revolution. I think everyone is fighting over the pieces. He smiled at her. Well, actually, you might be too young to have experienced this, but I've lived through two massive changes in humanity. Getting phones wasn't as big a change as AI, Angelique remarked with a side eye. He shrugged. It's not as big as what is happening today, but it did completely change the way society operated. Phones were a tiny blip compared to AI, Angelique said, rolling her eyes. The singularity we're going through today changed the world order, just like the Industrial Revolution turned America into a superpower. AI has made a tiny country with only 5 million people into a superpower. The door in front of them distracted them from their debate. They had arrived at the Mission Control Center. The room was half full of rows of empty desks. It wasn't scheduled to be fitted out for a few months. They walked past the rows of empty desks. They kept walking until they reached a security door on the other side of the room, where Atlas punched in several numbers, then scanned his fingerprint. He opened the door and walked through, Angelique following close behind. There were 3 computer desks in this room. Atlas looked at each of the computers, reading the sign next to each one. He pointed at the one in the middle. You need to connect onto that computer. You'll have to use my credentials. What do you need me to do? Asked Angelique as she pulled out the chair and sat down in front of the screen. Your terminal unlocks the embryos. Begin the unlocking sequence and depressurizing the freezers. We need to get them moved onto the freezers on 4 spacecrafts ASAP. We're lucky there was a test launch scheduled for tomorrow, so our spacecrafts are mostly ready to launch, Atlas explained as he sat down in front of another computer and started typing away furiously. He found the screen he wanted and scanned the information, pulling up a list of available ants. ANTS stood for Automated Networked Tactical Spacecrafts. ANTS were automated bots that could operate in both space and on planets. By default, ANTS had 6 legs and 1 arm at the front. Each leg had an MPD arc jet at the bottom, capable of moving the robotic creature in and out of orbit. This made them ideal multi-purpose vehicles for their mission.
He clicked through the various configurations, looking for a particular model of ant.
There wasn't a search function, so he had to scroll through the options one at a time. After what felt like forever, he eventually found what he was looking for. This ant was about the size of a motorbike, but had a sealed chamber inside its center capable of moving the embryos across the Martian surface. He sent all 200 of them to the cryonics center on the base. "I'm sending a fleet of ants to start picking up the embryos." Angelique glanced at him, then turned back to her screen. "I've been going through everything we have in the cryonics center. How did we get some of these things? There's everything from elephants to whale embryos in here." Atlas shrugged. "I think some of that is just printed from DNA sequences. The technology to actually grow those is impressive, but I know Peter had been planning this for years. He buys some of this stuff from the dark web, so let's just hope it works." Atlas pointed at an image of one of the spacecrafts on his computer. "Don't you find it mind-blowing that one of these spacecrafts can produce as much energy as Earth used only 20 years ago?" Angelique looked at him with an expression of, duh. "That's the point I was making only a moment ago. The singularity has changed the world more than phones ever did." Atlas smiled.
"Okay, I believe you."
He turned his head back to typing. Angelique stood up from her computer and looked for a switch at the back.
"My computer just turned off. Is yours on?"
Atlas looked away from his typing.
"It shouldn't be able to turn off,"
Atlas replied.
As he stood up to look at Angelique's terminal, he noticed his computer switch off too. "They're shutting us out."
Angelique nodded. "This is bad." "Me too. Did you manage to get the orders out before your terminal shut down?" "I think so," Angelique said, pointing to her computer. "There's not much we can do now anyways." Agreed. Atlas turned away from both the computers. "That also means they know where we are." Atlas walked over to the door and peered out. "There's no one out there." He waved his hand, ushering Angelique over so they could get going. He could sense her fear as she walked past. They snuck out the door and past the row of tables, but instead of leaving the way they came, Atlas turned left this time, making his way towards another door. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He typed a code into the keypad and opened the door to a security room filled with camera screens. They looked at each of the screens, spotting Trillian and Icarus in his office. On one of the others, they could see 5 men. They were searching the sector of the base near the airlock they needed to use to get to the spacecrafts. Atlas took a deep breath. "That's not good. We need to get going now." They started walking briskly, taking a back passage to avoid being seen by the men. Atlas whispered as they slipped through a door. "The spacecraft should be fully loaded by now. There should be an airlock around that corner. Let's put on the spacesuits and get ready to enter the airlock as soon as the other 2 get here." Angelique nodded, struggling to hide the concern on her face.
Hello, this is Devyn Boer reading Chapter 3, Trillian, Hello Ship. Trillian wondered what it was going to be like to lose her body. All the training had put her in peak mental health, but it felt like such a waste of training. During the academy, they explained that being in peak shape helped the brain become more accepting of what she'd be able to do once she's a simulation. Once she left her body, she pushed those existential thoughts to the back of her head as they arrived at the office. She swiped the card. The door unlocked. "Icarus, you open the safe. I'm going to find a weapon. I know Atlas keeps something in here." She rummaged around in the drawers. A paper knife? A paperweight? Something.
"So, we're all going to die today?" Icarus said as he opened the safe. He started going through all the boxes, putting the ones with each of their names on them in a pile.
Trillian raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure it counts as dying if we wake up in the same body.
I'm getting a new body. I'm going to come back as an anime cartoon.
A cartoon? Icarus, that's gotta be the most cliche Japanese thing ever. Trillian smiled a little when she thought about what Icarus would look like as an anime character. She thought he'd look funnier as a Simpsons character. I think I might change my last name to Von Neumann, she said, thinking about what changes she'd make. Icarus stared at her blankly. Then she watched as it turned around in his head. He smiled when he finally understood.
You and Atlas are the same. You both have a creative way of naming things.
What do you mean?
Okay, changing Von Nicole to Von Neumann is clever. But have you heard about the elephants?
No, what are they?
Just wait until you see them on your spacecraft. One of Atlas's inventions.
Trillian found what she was looking for. A small knife. More of a butter knife, but still a weapon.
Icarus handed Trillian a box. I've got all 4. Here's yours.
She opened it. There was a small earpiece in the box. She placed it in her ear. Hello, ship? Is that you? Hello? No response.
Mine's not working either, Icarus said, tapping on his ear. We can't connect to the ship's AI if they've disconnected the satellite network. Maybe this network is down too.
Trillian looked at her other earpiece. She turned it around.
Trillian, fun fact. Each of these AIs are unique to us. That's why we all have separate headphones. They'll all start off the same, but should evolve with us.
Trillian found a little button. She clicked it. It should work. The communication network from the ship should be independent of Mars. Them hacking that network shouldn't impact us. She placed the earpieces back in her ears. Hello, Trillian. Hey, ship, do you know what happened? Yes, I've been monitoring everything from on board. Are we leaving soon? Yes, it's time to put all our practice into action. Icarus and Trillian both spoke to their respective ships' AIs, instructing them to prep each spaceship for launch. Getting Atlas and Angelique's ships to capitulate was a little harder. They did not recognize the voices, so a randomly generated string of 10 numbers had to be read out. Luckily, the box had a little calculator device that produced these numbers. Both Trillian and Icarus could feel the pressure. They felt like they'd been in the same place for too long. They closed Atlas's office and took off in a run. As they ran, Trillian started to question everything. Did she really need to go off into space? Had she had enough time to think about everything? Was she really going to be the same person? She stopped running and began to walk. Icarus, I don't think I fully understand why we can't just wait until we get old before uploading our minds. Icarus slowed down too, walking in lockstep. It's a long journey. You'll be bored out of your mind traveling through space alone. At least, as a simulation, you can turn off and then wake up in another system. Trillian nodded. Okay, but then why do we have to be changed? Why can't I stay myself? Why does my personality need to be changed? It's simple, Trillian. We'll be on this journey for thousands of years. Maybe even longer. Humans get bored of things easily. If we don't hard code us with want to seed worlds, in 500 years, we probably won't want to seed worlds with life. Besides, Trillian, as soon as you achieve that goal, that desire is deleted from your matrix. It goes away. What do you want to do after that? Not sure. Explore the galaxy, come back to Earth. What about you? I might write a book about this adventure. They picked up the pace again, rounding the final corner. Up ahead, they could see Angelique and Atlas hastily putting on spacesuits.
We need to leave now, Atlas urged, indicating 2 suits nearby. Hurry.
Trillian could see the fear in Atlas's eyes. He was afraid of something. His hands were shaking. She had handed him the gun. What happened, Atlas? He didn't answer. He looked over her shoulder and turned white with fear. Trillian spun around and saw 5 men running towards them. She recognized one of them because he had a bandaged hand. He was the guy that they had tied up and left in the conference room. They were all armed, pointing guns at the 4 of them.
Freeze right there,
one of them yelled.
You're under arrest.
Trillian hoped they wouldn't be stupid enough to shoot at an airlock door. Although they had shot Peter, this was obviously serious enough to shoot first and ask questions later. It was a race now. The 4 of them jumped into the airlock and closed the door, frantically attempting to get their suits on. Trillian hadn't got her helmet on yet. Only Atlas had his helmet on, she realized. Atlas put his hand over the airlock switch.
Sorry, team, I need to start decompressing the chamber now.
Trillian took deep breaths out, trying to expel the oxygen being sucked out of her body. She managed to get the helmet onto her head, but she was fumbling with the 4 clips she needed to close. She was running out of breath. One at a time, she managed to clip down each of the 4 latches, finally securing her helmet in place. She was lightheaded, but she could finally breathe. She stood there, waiting for the airlock to cycle out all the air. The pursuers were now at the other side of the airlock, but they were making no attempt to open the door. They stood there smiling, clearly happy with themselves. Strange, Trillian thought. Soon, she and the others would be safely on the Martian landscape, on the way to each of their launch pads. A shiver went up Trillian's spine. The man with the bandaged hand was staring at her, an evil look on his face. He smiled wickedly at her. She imagined a spider grinning as its prey stuck in its web. She had broken his hand, and he was coming for her.
Hello, this is Nathanael, reading Chapter 4, Trillian, the Betaverse. Trillian's mental clock told her it was taking longer than normal. She could tell the atmosphere was gone. The suit had the rigid feel they got when operating in a vacuum, but the airlock door hadn't automatically opened. Perhaps that's why the men outside looked happy. Did they not realize the outer door could be opened manually? As if thinking the same thing, Icarus walked over to the outer airlock. I think they shut the airlock down, hoping to trap us in here. We'll have to manually operate the door. The plan to trap them in there might have worked if they hadn't already cycled the air out. Airlocks were designed to make it easy for people to get into them, not out of them. Angelique joined Icarus at the airlock door. There was a large metal wheel set into the door. It was used to manually wind the door open or shut. It was useful in times of emergencies, like when the power cut off on the mechanical doors, or, as Trillian thought, when there were 5 men with guns on the other side. As they began to turn the wheel, the room glowed a shimmer of blue. It was the blue shimmer that always accompanied a haptic hologram projector coming online, or haptogram, as its inventor had named it. The blue shimmer was added to signal to anyone seeing it that the hologram could interact with the world. Atlas had invented the haptogram about 6 months ago. He had installed it in all the airlocks as a safety measure. His words, "It's faster to stream into the airlock to help someone than run down and open the doors." Trillian guessed Atlas was regretting being so adamant they were installed. Unlike normal holograms, haptograms look like bubbles rising out from the ground, whereas holograms just appear. Haptograms rise into place. They watched as 2 people emerged, one of them a woman, possibly in her mid-40s. She had the look of someone who was used to being in control. She stood upright, hands behind her back, the stars on her shoulder showing she was the general of Earth's Space Force. That would make her Sarah Walker. Her haptogram was large, bigger than the average human, designed to be larger than the 4 beta explorers. A man rose up out of the ground. His hand reached out and grabbed hold of the wheel Icarus and Angelique were turning. It froze in place. The haptogram was strong enough to lift a human. It needed to be if there was ever a problem in the airlock. So, stopping the other two from turning the mechanical door was easy. The man had a buzz cut, and his lapels showed he was a corporal, simply there to be muscle. He was surprisingly shorter than everyone. The haptogram only had enough material to create 2 average-sized humans. They must have chosen to make General Walker larger at the cost of the grunt. This is Lieutenant General Sarah Walker of the United Earth Space Force. You 4 are to be relocated to Earth. We have an extraction order signed here. The voice of General Walker beamed through her suit's headphones. Atlas wasted no time in replying, "You have no jurisdiction on Mars." That line must have gotten under General Walker's skin. A flash of anger hit her face, which made sense. She had to have been in the Space Force before Earth and Mars split. Her head snapped in Atlas's direction. "This is the Betaverse. I have full jurisdiction in the Betaverse." There was that word again. Trillian hated that word. Once humanity began spending more time in the metaverse, and once humans in the metaverse outnumbered those in the real world, they had started calling the real world the Betaverse, the beta version of the metaverse. General Walker wasn't done with her speech. Like all people of power, long monologues and speeches came easy to her. "You're all smart people here. You must clearly understand why we haven't seen any aliens. The Fermi paradox, as it has come to be called." She paused for dramatic effect. "The answer is simple. Any sufficiently advanced civilization chooses to explore the depths of the metaverse, leaving the betaverse behind." "That's not true," Atlas snapped. "It only takes one set of people to go out and explore to destroy your whole argument. We are going to explore now. We'll prove your argument is wrong." General Walker didn't even look at him when she responded. "Ah, and this is where I know I'm right." She smiled. "The fact we haven't seen any aliens is proof you have no chance of succeeding. Civilization leaders like me must have 100% success rate at stopping crazy people like you. Otherwise, you're right. And we would have seen an alien already." Icarus had his turn to argue. Trillian knew he had thought about the Fermi paradox a lot. They had many deep conversations about it, both wondering if they would ever see alien life. Icarus had a fascination with languages and saw translating an alien language as his ultimate goal. Icarus pointed a finger up at the general. "All alien life somehow coming together and all agreeing not to communicate with any other life is a lot of rubbish. It doesn't make any logical sense. It just takes one rogue person in a species to send a message to our system, and boom, they let the cat out of the bag." General Walker turned around to face Icarus. He still had one hand on the airlock door. The general shook her head. "That argument assumes it's easy. A rogue member of a species would need to, 1, have the ability to do it, and 2, have the ability to keep doing it until someone eventually hears them, regardless of who was trying to stop them." She turned around, facing away from the 4 of them. The gestures were deliberate, as if she was saying, "You 4 are trapped now," so she was becoming bored of them. "Let me put it another way. A rogue person could wipe out most of humanity, engineering diseases, sending a relativistic asteroid to all 3 planets. The list goes on, but the reason it hasn't and won't happen is because it's not easy, and there will always be people like myself stopping them." Trillian always held her thoughts privately, in a way she could see the general's point of view. "The point you 4 have failed to grasp is that the Fermi paradox has a solution. It's quite obvious when you think about it. Our greatest supercomputers have crunched the numbers thousands of times, and each time they come up with the exact same conclusion." General Walker took a deep breath. Trillian wondered why she spoke with so much theater. They understood Earth's arguments. They didn't agree with them, but they understood them. "Any sufficiently advanced civilization," the general continued, "would choose to live in a simulated world because it's infinite. Any sufficiently advanced civilization would choose to leave other worlds alone because doing so would limit the number of possible outcomes. Humanity is a sufficiently advanced civilization. We have a moral duty to grow the number of possible outcomes, not shrink them." This is where Trillian lost all sense of logic. How would them exploring the galaxy have any impact in the richness and diversity of experiences possible in the universe? Trillian could feel her suit getting less stiff. They were repressuring the airlock. It wouldn't be long before the men on the other side of the airlock had her in handcuffs and headed for Earth. She figured she had nothing to lose. She spoke up for the first time during this interaction, almost like a school kid. She reflexively raised her hand into the air as if to ask a question. The ease she felt in moving the spacesuit indicated the room was almost fully pressurized. I don't understand. How are we limiting the potential experiences in the universe? Trillian asked. General Walker's head turned to face Trillian. Is it not true that we can simulate an infinite amount of universes? Yes, but that's not the point, Trillian replied. No, it's the point exactly. It's a mathematical certainty that the number of experiences you can have in the metaverse is greater than the betaverse. The metaverse is infinite. The betaverse is finite. Yeah, but why should that stop us from exploring the betaverse? Trillian mimed, quotation marks with her fingers. She hated how much that word had grown on her in the past several years. But she still hated to say the damn thing. She wondered what prison was like on Earth. Was it in the metaverse or the betaverse? It was a while before General Walker responded. Don't you see? If you go and see the world, that world could only evolve life that is compatible with Earth life. That limits the possible evolutionary paths. This isn't about that. This is about ensuring humanity is around for the next several million years. Having us based in multiple systems guarantees that if anything happens on Sol, we will still survive. A million years from now, a colony separate from Sol won't be humans. Trillian was stumped. She hated having arguments with others on the spot, and General Walker was quick. She had answers to everything. Trillian was about to sit down, resigning herself to being captured, when she heard a voice in her ear. Trillian, it's Ship. She still had her earpiece on. She could still communicate with the ship. When I didn't see you come out of the airlock, I started checking on you, Trillian. I think I know how to get you out of there. Trillian didn't say a thing, afraid she might give up their one trump card. There's an emergency kill switch to your right. If you pull that down, the haptogram will turn off. Trillian looked to her right. Sure enough, there was a large switch. The words read haptogram engine on. General Walker was still monologuing. Trillian waited for a distraction. It wasn't long until Atlas jumped in with a counter-argument. Trillian dived for the switch with her right hand and pulled it down. The whole room suddenly flashed yellow and red. Emergency lights started rotating around the room, presumably to signal the emergency switch had been flicked. As the lights flashed, General Walker and the corporal melted into a sea of marbles. The room was filled with tiny pea-sized marbles, which began to bounce off the walls. Flicking the switch had obviously killed the magnets controlling the haptic engine, dropping them to the floor. We need to go now, Trillian said, almost willing Icarus and Angelique to wind the airlock door amidst the chaos of tiny balls bouncing around them. Icarus grabbed the mechanical airlock door and spun it hard. It didn't budge. Angelique joined in and it started to move, slightly at first, then more smoothly. It took several turns and a lot of effort, but finally, the outer airlock door was opened. Trillian expected to get sucked through the door, but it was more of a strong breeze as the airlock unpressurized. Millions of tiny balls spilled through the door as the four of them made their escape, trying not to trip over them on the way out. Atlas grabbed a large rock and shoved it in the airlock door, preventing the men from closing the outside door to repressurize it, effectively making the closest airlock to the launch pad useless so the gunmen would have to use another airlock. As the team took off, they had a good 500 meters of red Martian regolith to cross before reaching the first of the launch pads. There were 16 launch pads in total, all evenly spaced in a grid format hundreds of meters apart. The Martian gravity made getting around in spacesuits easy. They were all equipped with a smart exoskeleton that made the Martians skip-jump-walk technique so much easier to do. The team began to jump-skip out of the airlock, out towards the launch pads. Hello, this is Nathanael, reading Chapter 5, Trillian, Takeoff. Trillian's communication speaker was still picking up the ramblings of General Walker, but as she got further away, the General's voice started to drop off, making way for the team to speak freely with each other again. They still didn't want to risk anyone hearing them, so they kept their details sparse. Atlas explained the plan as they walked. We each have a specific launch pad. Because our individual brain matrices are already loaded into them, we can't use anyone else's spacecraft. Those brain matrices were physically built to match each of our brains. Trillian, you're the lucky one. You're going to launch pad A1. It's the first one we will reach. From there, Angelique and I will split off to launch pads D2 and D4. Icarus, you'll keep going straight ahead. You'll take off from launch pad A4. Does everyone remember Project Shatterling? Angelique asked, taking over from where Atlas had left off. Everyone nodded. Angelique reminded the team anyway with practiced efficiency. It means we have to use the authenticator tool Trillion handed us to randomize our destination. Only your ship will know where you end up. That reduces the risk of anyone being able to come after us once we've gone. You'll wake up in 100 years or so in a new star system. Angelique paused for a moment. Trillion could tell it was hard for her to get the words out. Trillion guessed she had tried to say the words robotically, so she didn't hear the words. But she obviously realized what she was about to say. She had a little croak in her voice, which revealed a touch of sadness. Trillion broke the tension by speaking first. It means we get reborn, Trillion said, not quite believing the words herself. Angelique nodded. Atlas and I have made sure the brain scanning machines are fully activated in everyone's ship. You should all upload your minds within the next day or two. The ships aren't designed to carry life unless it's frozen. They were silent after that, everyone deep in thought until they reached a large steel door with a roller wheel on it. It was similar to an airlock door, a reliable model out on the Martian surface. Behind the door was a long concrete trench about 10 meters deep. Although it had no roof, it was designed to offer protection for workers and crew while spacecrafts launched. A lip running all the way along the top of the trench meant that the thin Martian atmosphere and dust would be pushed over the top of it as spacecrafts launched, ensuring those in the trenches could continue their work as normal. Icarus and Angelique began turning the large roller door. They visibly strained as they struggled to budge it. That's the wrong way, Trillion called out. They both stopped turning, slightly confused by what Trillion just said. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, Trillion said. Left from the bottom or left from the top, Icarus said, his hands now firmly pulling the wrong way. He looked confused. The stress and pressure must have confused him, Trillion thought. Angelique was the first to click. She began turning it the correct way. The door began to loosen and then open. Angelique worked hard to open the heavy door, stepping through and leading the way. If the team had a drone in the air, it would have looked like they were entering a maze network of trenches, linking all the different launch pads together. The four of them skipped along, finally reaching the launch pad of Trillion's ship. All 16 spacecrafts looked the same. They were massive, at least 50 meters tall. They looked like two egg-shaped objects connected together via a large ring. I guess this is goodbye, Angelique said as they stopped at an elevator at the bottom of the rocket. She lowered her head, her movements noticeably slower as she tried to hide her emotions. Trillion sensed everyone's mood changing. She hadn't stopped to think about how they were actually leaving everyone behind. She had been too distracted by running away. Suddenly, everything hit her at once. I thought I was going to have a chance to say goodbye to everyone, Trillion said, with tears in her eyes. She didn't want to leave. She figured the four of them had time. Just then, she heard Ship coming through her earpiece. Trillion, if everyone doesn't leave right now, they might not make it to the ship in time. Trillion looked around. What is happening, Ship? There are a lot of spacecrafts approaching. I don't think it's wise for us to be here when they arrive. Angelique still has a long way to travel by foot before she can leave. Any longer and she might not make it. I suggest we leave now. Trillion stepped towards the elevator. She paused and turned around. She hugged Icarus, then Angelique, then Atlas. With a heavy heart, she entered the elevator. She pressed the button and started her ascent to the spaceship. The countdown sequence was quick. Trillion had barely left the elevator before Ship had started the engines. She entered the spacecraft's airlock. There was a chair in front of her with a large donut-shaped instrument just above the headrest. She presumed it was the brain scan machine. She slumped down in her chair. The engines must have increased their output because she could feel blood flowing to her feet. Robotic arms began to reach out and remove her spacesuit. She let it happen. She was exhausted. She felt heavy and sleepy as she heard Ship speaking in her ear. Sorry, Trillion. I've been speaking with the other ships. We need to leave now. The wake and debris we create needs time to settle before Icarus can launch. Every second we stay on Mars is a second we add to everyone's departure time. Trillian didn't mind. Her sleepy brain was still processing the idea of never seeing her friends again as she dropped off to sleep.
Welcome everyone. This is Wojciech Matras. Reading Chapter 6 Atlas Last One Left. Atlas hopped down towards the next runway. He and Angelic had the furthest to go before reaching their spacecrafts. They had a long journey ahead, so they talked and discussed things as they moved. Atlas looked at Angelic with concern. I keep feeling like I'm forgetting something. Angelic turned around, hopping through the air as she did. She started to bounce backwards, facing Atlas as she moved. I think we are all feeling that. This morning, we didn't think we were going to go. Atlas shook his head inside his helmet. No, I think it's something real. Angelique was a natural at moving in the spacesuits. She raised both hands and shrugged. It's too late now. Atlas almost tripped, thinking too hard and not focusing on his skip walking technique. Oh, I remember now. It wasn't important to the mission, but it would be a bit of surprise to the other two when they found out. What is it? Lex. Atlas could see the confused look on Angelica's face. I installed an AI called Lex onto each of the spacecrafts when we were at the terminals, he explained. It's a supercomputer designed to manage all the information we store. There's a lot of petabytes of information each of those spacecrafts are holding. Angelique turned back around. So what? Atlas almost tripped as he walked. He wasn't used to such a long spacewalk. Well, I installed an older version. It can't speak. Angelique raised an eyebrow. What use is an AI that can't communicate with us? Especially one designed for managing all the information we have. Atlas started to puff as he hopped along. I know. Let's hope our main ship AI can do most of the translation. He pointed at the card inside his suit pocket. That security card Trilon handed to you gives you complete access to your spacecraft and ship, your spacecraft's AI. Change the codes to something you can remember so that you'll always have complete control. I thought they were unhackable, Angelique said, as she waved goodbye to Icarus' spacecraft as it raced through the skies. Atlas nodded. You're right. They aren't hackable, but you never know. After what felt like running a marathon, the two of them arrived at Atlas's spacecraft. Atlas hugged Angelique. I will see you in a few thousand years. He could see tears in her eyes again. She was sad, but couldn't wipe them away. She held him tight. Atlas pulled away, knowing she still had a long way to go before reaching her launch pad. He didn't want her to linger any longer than she needed to. He remembered ship's warning about other spacecraft heading their way. He knew if he kept her too long, she risked getting trapped on Mars. Every second counted, so he turned around and jumped into the elevator. Pressing the button, he started to ascend. Atlas watched as Angelique watched him ascend. He made a leaving gesture with his hand, willing Angelique to get going. Seeing his gesture, she began her journey towards her launch pad. Atlas watched as Angelique hopped away, much faster this time, without him slowing her down.
Hello, this is Thomas Calvert, reading Chapter 7, Icarus, Preparation for Tomorrow. Icarus found his back pressed into the chair. He had barely lain down when the rocket started to take off. It was getting harder to breathe, too. Breathing out was easy, but he was struggling to breathe in. He looked up at the ceiling, head pinned to the seat. A large donut-shaped device drifted over his head, obscuring his view. He realized what he was looking at. I've changed my mind, Ship. I don't want my mind uploaded just yet. Ship appeared in the room and moved the brain scanner backwards off Icarus's head, replacing the donut-shaped device with his own head. Icarus studied the robotic face of Ship. It had a subtle, shimmering glow that accompanied all haptic graphic projections. Ship's skin looked like a patchwork of tiny metallic black squares, peppered with metallic white ones. The white squares made up a pattern of lines on Ship's skin. Icarus realized he had only ever heard Ship's voice during training over the speakers. This was the first time he had come into contact with its avatar. His avatar, Icarus corrected himself. Ship always referred to itself as a he. Ship's face blinked in front of Icarus. I wouldn't recommend taking this journey in physical form. Most of this spacecraft isn't well protected enough. As soon as we leave the heliosphere, your body will be subjected to so many fast-moving particles that the risk of cancer is enormous. Ship moved his head out from in front of Icarus. Then you wouldn't survive very long. Icarus shook his head. I still want to upload my mind, but there are a few things I want to discuss with you. I still have time, don't I? An orb appeared in front of Icarus. It flashed a bright green, the color spiraling hypnotically within the orb in an ethereal display. He pointed a finger at the orb, struggling to raise his hand above the G-forces he was experiencing. Am I seeing things? Is that a hypersphere? Ship followed Icarus's finger towards the object he was pointing to. That's Lex. Us two are your crew. He's our resident supercomputer. Ship paused for a moment, obviously thinking over Icarus's question. Yes, I do think he models his avatar after a hypersphere. I know Atlas found it mesmerizing, so he designed Lex that way. Icarus moved his eyes towards Ship, not wanting to risk moving his head. And why did he just change color? Does he constantly shift colors? He flashed green to signal, yes, you still have time. Although, if you'd like to stay here for more than a day, you should know we don't have any food. Icarus started to shake his head before realizing the G-forces might hurt him. He stopped shaking his head. No, I don't know how much more of this I can take. Do we really need to accelerate at this speed? I'm afraid so, Ship said, nodding. There are Earth spacecrafts on their way here. We need to hit escape velocity as soon as possible to remove all risk of them coming after us. If you prefer, we could upload your mind and then have this whole conversation without you feeling the effects of an accelerating spacecraft. Again, Icarus had to fight back a headshake as he declined. He did not want to have his head stuck in an awkward position. It's okay. Ever since I got here, I had a plan for what I would experience waking for the first time as a simulation. He breathed in deeply, fighting against the heavy feeling created by the gravitational force equivalent. He was getting heavier, meaning their acceleration rate was increasing. In my pocket, there's a memory stick. Can you grab that out? Ship reached into Icarus's pocket, pulling out a pack of gum and a wallet. The other pocket, Icarus said, realizing his mistake. Ship walked around to the other side of Icarus and reached into his pocket, pulling out a keyring with a cartoon duck on it. Attached to the keyring was a memory stick. Ship held it in front of Icarus's face. Is this what you want? Icarus squinted to see it. It was too close to his face, but he recognized the duck keyring. Yes, that's it. This is important, Ship. I've been planning this since the first day I got here. It was becoming harder to breathe, so he took a few deep breaths. There are 2 folders in there. The one labeled Avatar. I want to look like that avatar. The second is my wake-up sequence. I want to go through that the first time I wake up as a simulation. Icarus took a few breaths in and out to steady himself against the lightheadedness he was feeling. Don't wake me until we get to a new planet. Scan my brain, build my new matrix, but don't turn me on until we are in a new system hundreds of years into the future. I want no chance of me wanting to turn around. He paused for a moment to get the words out. Or see my family. Icarus started to weep. The lack of oxygen made emotions even stronger, similar to a flight on a plane. He decided he needed to go on with things quickly. Okay, I'm ready, Ship. Scan my brain now. And remember, he said, blinking away a tear, I want tomorrow to be hundreds of years from now.
Howdy do. This is Roasted Oats, reading Chapter 8, Atlas, the Ship of Atlas. Atlas stared out into space, his gray head leaning against the window of his lab. It had been many years since he began the journey from Mars, and he still hadn't run out of problems to try and solve. His current problem was trying to make faster-than-light communication work. He pulled his head away from the port window. He was stumped by one experiment. A laser in the middle of the room was pointed at one of the walls, its red light accentuated and obvious with his enhanced simulated eyesight. He thought some more about the laser as he looked at distant stars. Ship entered the lab. Atlas, he said, how different do you think I'll be in 1,000 years? A puzzled look crossed Atlas's face. Ship had obviously been thinking about this for some time. What do you mean? I'm still the same AI as all the other AIs that left Mars the day I did. But over time, not being connected to the soul's connection network, I wondered how much I will drift and change from my initial personality. You will evolve, that's guaranteed, as would all other ships on this journey, Atlas said. Atlas knew Ship wasn't looking forward to the long journey, especially with him. Atlas slumped a little. Atlas, you look tired, Ship said before continuing. Do you think I'll come to enjoy experiments as much as you? To be honest, I find none of this appealing. I kind of want to go to sleep until we get to the planet. Atlas smiled. What you're feeling is boredom. You're an AI running a ship, but when we're traveling through deep space, everything is automated. I think you will change and evolve. You have to. Otherwise, we wouldn't put a capable AI like yourself in charge of a spacecraft. Ship nodded. Atlas smiled a big grin. Besides, if you're bored, help me with this. We have a lot of years to find you something to get excited about. Atlas wondered if Ship's laziness was a feature rather than a bug. Maybe ship AIs that were curious took more risks and were more likely to get their occupants killed. He thought about the saying, curiosity kills the cat. Maybe on a 1,000-year journey, curiosity is dangerous. Atlas turned away from the window and wandered to the middle of the room where a small red laser light was projecting onto one of the walls. He looked over at Ship. Have you heard of the double-slit quantum eraser experiment? Ship shook his head in a bemused sort of way. I found an interesting result while we're out in deep space, Atlas said before continuing. I've been recreating some experiments, and I've noticed something surprising when quantum particles aren't impacted by a gravity well, like a planet. Atlas could tell Ship was thinking about the other failed experiments. 128 years on this journey had given Atlas an ability to read Ship. Atlas held up a black piece of metal and handed it to Ship. Ship examined it. It was so thin it could easily cut someone. He held it up to the light. He could see through it in 2 places. The 2 slits in the piece of metal were faint. What is this? It's a little piece of metal, but it has 2 tiny slits in it. Ship smirked. I can see that, but what's it for? Atlas pointed at the laser. It's for this. The laser was a large square device with a tiny, almost microscopic light shining out of it. The only reason either of them could see it was because their eyesight was enhanced through the spacecraft's sensors. This laser is shooting light 1 photon at a time. Atlas stepped away from the laser emitter. Follow me. He walked over to where the laser light was hitting the wall. Atlas pointed to the black piece of metal in Ship's hand. What do you think will happen if you put that metal between the laser and the wall? Ship noticed there was a little clip holder mounted about 10 centimeters away from the wall. It was between the laser light and the wall, just big enough to hold what was in his hand. I think it will go through one of the slits, Ship pronounced in a sarcastic-sounding voice. Atlas had a feeling that Ship was humoring him. Perhaps he didn't want to be there, but Atlas loved to talk about his theories, so he decided to ignore Ship's sarcasm. Go ahead, place this clip in that little holder. Ship placed the piece of metal in the clip in front of the wall and pushed it firmly into place with an audible click. The laser light hit dead center through the piece of the metal. Atlas grinned from ear to ear. He was looking at the pattern on the back wall, which had changed from a single dot to a horizontal line across the back wall. It stretched only 5 centimeters across before fading out. It's called an interference pattern, Atlas explained excitedly. Why isn't there just 1 dot on the wall anymore? Ship queried, looking at the light with interest. Instead of a single red dot on the back wall, there was a horizontal line of dots blurring into each other. The effect created a line with light and dark glowing areas. Is there a filter that breaks up the light? Asked Ship. I didn't see any lens in the device you gave me. No, it's this strange effect of how light acts as both a wave and a particle. As the light shoots out of this laser, he pointed to the light beam, it acts like a particle, traveling in a straight direction. Then, it reaches this little slit here. Atlas pointed to the piece of metal Ship had inserted into the clip 10 centimeters away from the wall. It acts like a wave, and goes through both slits at once. I still don't get why it would create a horizontal line, Ship interjected. When the light photon travels through both slits at once, they bounce off of each other on the other side of the metal. Some of the light bounces right, and some bounces left, Atlas said. A light photon bounces off itself? You mean it bounces off another photon? Ship asked. Nope, Atlas said, shaking his head. It bounces off itself. It's strange, but that's quantum mechanics for you. Atlas unclipped the black piece of metal. The light turned back into a single red dot on the wall. Then Atlas reinserted the black piece of metal, and the horizontal interference line appeared once more. That's a neat trick, Atlas, but I don't understand how that's relevant. Atlas could see the curiosity in Ship now. He had practiced this charade. He was going to draw out the story before revealing the surprise at the end. Atlas produced another object, this time not a piece of metal. He held it up to Ship with a massive grin on his face. The object was a clear piece of glass with white bands across the top. What's that? Ship asked. It's a photon detector. It will detect exactly which slit the light travels through. I thought you said it travels through both as a wave. It does, but this is where things get interesting. Atlas handed the photon detector to Ship. Place this over the metal slit. Ship did as instructed. This time he didn't have to push it into place. When the 2 pieces got close together, the detector he was holding was sucked towards the metal slit with a magnetic snap. The detector had 2 lights hidden in the top. As soon as it was clicked into place, both the lights lit up. Their heads turned in unison towards the wall. This time, the laser light had changed. It was back to being a point. "Why has it stopped doing that interference pattern?" Chip asked. "It's the oddest thing with light particles. They act as a light and waves in all situations except one," Atlas said. "What's the one exception?" "When you're trying to measure it," Atlas said, pointing at the device. "That detector is identifying which slit the light traveled through." Atlas turned to the screen up on the wall. There was a video showing the photon detector. Both lights lit up. "This is a slow-motion camera." Atlas clicked a button on the screen. Everything in the shot slowed. The beam of light, which up until that moment looked constant, started to shudder, slowly at first before vibrating at speed. Then it started to pulsate slower until it was clear the laser was switching on and off. On, off. On, off. The indicator light at the top of the clear photon detector was no longer constant. The left light flashed on and off, and then the right one, at random intervals. "The high-speed camera allows us to watch a recording of individual photons as they pass through the detector," explained Atlas, "and we can see if it passes through the left slit or the right slit based on which light goes off." He paused, allowing Chip to fully understand the footage. Before, it just looked like both light-ups were lit up simultaneously. Now you can see as each photon passes each of the detectors. Atlas could see Chip's mind taking over, trying to work out this puzzle. Atlas wondered if he'd finally got Chip excited about something. "So how does this help with anything?" Chip asked. Atlas switched off the video and walked back towards the laser pointer. "So, we agree that light acts as a wave and a particle when there is no detector there, but as soon as there is a detector, it only acts as a particle, traveling through one slit at a time." "Yes, but you never explained why light works like that." "I don't know. It was a result I didn't believe in myself until I tested it." Atlas arrived at the original laser generator in the middle of the room. Chip followed behind. Atlas fiddled with his computer on the table next to the laser, then looked up at the laser pointer. There was a large switch on it, which he flicked on. A bright green laser light flickered into existence, shooting out the back of the laser pointer in the opposite direction of the red laser. It hit the opposite wall, exactly the same setup as before, only this time it was green light. "Do you know what quantum entanglement is?" Atlas asked Chip. "Quantum entanglement is when two or more particles link together in a certain way no matter how far apart they are in space," Chip recited from memory. "Exactly. So this laser shoots entangled particles out of either end. So in theory, doing something to the green laser should impact the red laser." Atlas knew that wasn't quite correct, but it was getting super technical now. He knew that Chip was losing interest, so wanted to skim over this part as quickly as possible. "Oh, I forgot one thing." Atlas ran over to where the red laser ended and extracted the detector. Then, out of his pocket, he produced another piece of metal with 2 slits in it and handed it to Chip. "Do the honors." Chip inserted the metal clips into its slot. They watched as the green laser produced the interference pattern and the horizontal green line stretched out. "Now the detector," Atlas instructed, handing Chip the detector. Chip placed the detector over the metal slit, and with the same magnetic click, he slotted it into place. They both looked at the wall. The green horizontal line flickered and became a single dot once more. "So what? You already showed me that would happen," Chip said. "Wait until you see the best part," Atlas replied. He beamed with excitement, certain that Chip would be impressed by what he was about to see. With a quick yank, Atlas pulled the clear photon detector off, leaving the metal slit still in its place. The green light instantly turned back into a long horizontal line. "Now can you see what your green laser light is doing?" Atlas asked. Chip looked at the green laser light on the wall. "Into the green line thing again. Now stay there and watch what happens." Atlas dashed over to the red laser, which was producing a horizontal line. "Remember how I said the laser light is entangled? Whatever I do to this light happens to the other?" With that, he slotted the photon detector into the slot. Click. "What do you see?" Atlas called out. "It's changed into a green dot." "Exactly. I don't get it. How did my one change to a dot?" Chip called out. Atlas knew this part was going to be the hardest to explain. Light takes time to travel from one side of the room to the other, but when he inserted the detector, the change occurred to both lasers at the exact same time. It didn't happen at the slow speed of light. Would you believe that yours changed the exact moment mine did? What do you mean? Imagine this, Ship. If we sent the green laser to one side of the galaxy, and we sent the red laser to the other side, what would happen if we did this neat trick, but crossing many, many light years? Oh, Ship said, finally realizing the implications of the change happening faster than the speed of light, faster than C. Are you saying you could use it to send information to the other side of the galaxy, faster than the speed of light? Exactly, Ship. It's called binary code. A 0 could represent a dot, and a 1 could represent a line. And this works? Why hasn't anyone done this? Ship asked. Well, we need to test it on a larger scale. What we built in this lab, the distances aren't big enough. I have Lex building a larger laser. We're going to test it out in space. It should be done in a month. I have an idea, Ship said. Suddenly he stopped moving. He appeared to have frozen on the spot. You all right, Ship? Atlas asked. You're not moving. He waved his hands at Ship. Hello? Ship was unresponsive for a good few seconds. Atlas started to feel a little off, like something wasn't quite right. He couldn't put his finger on it. Atlas worried that they had been impacted by something. Did Ship have to urgently take control of the ship, as was standard procedure? Atlas teleported himself to the bridge. He looked out the window over the bridge. The stars were moving towards him surprisingly fast. Too fast. He'd never seen them traveling at speeds they were traveling through space. Atlas never thought he would be able to see stars moving like that. Maybe they had been hit by something. Ship appeared on the bridge. Atlas, sorry, I didn't think it would work. What? Atlas said, looking around the room for potential danger. I sped up our perception of time. The last month of real time, to us, has felt like only a few seconds. What? Atlas could see things changing through the window of the bridge. Stars started to slow down. The subtle hue of blue that he hadn't noticed before disappeared. That was cool, Ship. How'd you do that? Ship grinned from ear to ear. Is that your first invention? Atlas patted him on the shoulder. Proud of you, Ship. Has a month really just gone past? Ship nodded proudly. Atlas was impressed. He would take a mental note of this day, the day Ship changed and started inventing. Ship looked happy, but Atlas could tell he was distracted. What is it, Ship? Atlas, can you meet me in my room in 15 minutes? Sure thing, buddy. 20 minutes passed. Atlas walked the long way to Ship's office and knocked on the door. The door swung open into a large, bright room with a gold ceiling and what looked to be marble walls. Atlas looked around the room in awe. Ship stepped out from behind a screen, and Atlas gasped at his transformation. He was no longer all black. He appeared to have human skin painted gold. Ship smiled at Atlas. Atlas could tell that Ship was proud of himself. He had come up with an idea and wanted to express himself, show his personality. I love what you've done with the place, Atlas said appreciatively, and continued to praise him. Atlas was unaware that Ship had posted his ideas to the other ships he had the locations for. Atlas and Ship hadn't slept like the other beta explorers, so it was easy enough for them to guess the general location. He knew where Ship Trillion was, but Icarus and Angelique were just guesses. Ship sent a secret message, sharing his invention. Let's see if our other experiment works too, suggested Atlas. Ship made a screen appear in front of Atlas. Atlas looked at the screen in surprise. I was going to suggest we go back to the lab, but okay, we can look at the results here. They had sent sensors away from the ship in opposite directions, approximately 5 light seconds apart. Entangled laser lights shone at each of the sensors. The screen showed the results of the test. It would take 5 light seconds to reach each side, so if the sensors registered a change faster than 5 seconds, it would be faster than light communication. Atlas scrolled through the screen looking for the figure. No numbers appeared. It simply showed a 0. Lex, can you double-check this? It's saying there was no delay at all. Lex's orb appeared in the corner of the room. His hypersphere skin morphed and flashed blue, signaling confusion. Atlas looked at Ship for an answer. Ship answered for Lex. He said there isn't any issue. The two sensors reacted at exactly the same time. There wasn't a difference in time between them. Atlas nearly lost his balance. Logically, he had expected it to work, but deep down, he thought once he scaled his test up into a larger format, it would stop working. Ship! We did it! This is true FDL communication! He jumped around triumphantly. I want to tell someone. But then he paused for a moment. It was true. He had just enabled two signals to trigger at the same time, but he hadn't actually created FTL communication. He wondered if he could take it to the next step. Could he take what he had just created and use it to build an FTL communication device? He thought about the possibility. Would he ever speak to his friends again?
Hi, this is Amaya, and I'm reading A New Eden. Chapter 9, Trillian, Waking. Trillian woke. Something felt different. She pulled up a screen and checked the year. She'd been sleeping for 102 years. Nothing odd there. After being uploaded into the simulation, she had discussed with Chip the best time to wake, and it was right before their arrival in roughly 100 or so years. She checked the expected time of arrival. 6 months. Nothing odd there either. She got out of bed and took a look around. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something out the window. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but somehow she knew something was wrong. She could see a large star in front of her, but that wasn't what was odd. She walked towards the window and peered out into space. To her left, she could see a galaxy's worth of stars, the same on her right. She thought. Something definitely didn't feel right. She took a step back and rubbed her eyes, the fog of waking not quite giving her clarity. She looked again, this time focusing on the star in front of her. She stared at it for a good few seconds and noticed that it was moving towards her. It was subtle, but as she looked out the windows, it looked like a time-lapse of space. She turned towards the galaxy of stars and thought she could see them moving too. She knew that shouldn't be possible at orbital speeds. She stepped back, checking the window again. She wasn't looking through a monitor, she was looking out to space. Realizing what was happening, she teleported out. Like a poorly timed jump cut, she appeared in front of Ship. Welcome back, Trillian. Good morning, she said, a little foggy. We're going to crash into that star. She knew they weren't actually going to hit the star, but she needed to get the point across. Not waiting for a reply, she added, And why is your office still empty? It's creepy. He was a little ticked off about it. She'd asked him to personalize his space. Actually, she demanded he decorate it before she woke. And it wasn't as if he didn't have time, she thought. She'd been sleeping for over 100 years. She pointed at the walls, clearly offended. Trillian, I have personalized it. It looks the same to me. No, I've designed it so you can't see the windows or the walls. Trillian stared blankly at Chip. Chip, this looks exactly the same as when I went to sleep. She looked around the place. She could see black on black on black, black walls and a black droid standing in the middle of the room. She pointed at the walls again. Look closer. The walls are designed to look black. Well, not black as such. They are designed to look as though they are not there. Trillian squinted, trying to get an understanding of what he was talking about. Chip continued. I'm especially proud of the lights because they don't look like lights. You almost can't tell they are there. She shook her head. Oh my god, Shib. She pointed up at the ceiling. The ceiling is too high to see, and it doesn't look like light is coming from anywhere, yet you can see me. She walked towards the middle of the room. Black is not a design, Shib. Well, now that you're here, you can help me decorate it if you're that angry about it. Shib snapped. I'm not angry, she paused. Well, maybe I'm angry, but only because you suggested it. Trillian shook her head. Okay, enough about your poor design choices. She took a deep breath. I'm concerned we're going to hit the star. What do you mean? She wondered whether something had gone wrong with ship while she slept. She thought the ships should know their own speed. We're traveling too fast. What do you mean? Ship, if you can't tell something's wrong, then something's faulty with your sensors. Ship nodded slowly. I don't think anything is wrong, but Trillian cut Ship off. This reminds me of the early days of space travel, before more custom AIs like you were developed. A very basic AI was on this spacecraft. I think it was called a Boeing 7 or Max 37. She scratched her head. The specifics don't matter. Anyways, it had a faulty sensor. The sensor kept telling the spacecraft it was pointed up when it was actually pointed down. Trillian pointed up and down as she spoke. The ship's AI would try and correct it by pointing it down, but that would worsen the situation. She took a deep breath. Basically, if the AI had only looked out the window, then it would have known the sensors were wrong. Ship cleared his voice, simulating a coughing sound. So you're saying my sensors are faulty? Show me. Yes, exactly. She handed a little tablet to Ship. On here, you can see everything looks normal. It says we're not traveling too fast. This feels very similar to the Boeing 7 incident. She pointed at the speed data on the screen. When I look at the number on the screen, everything is saying the ship is fine. It says we are moving slow enough to stay in orbit, but if I look out into space, I can see with my own eyes. But Trillian, we are not moving too fast. Ship, if I can see the star approaching us, we are moving too fast. Trillian thought about her situation. During the academy on Mars, she had learned a lot about how to deal with situations like this. She needed to restart Ship. There was a code to restart him. She scratched her head trying to remember the sequence. She clapped her hands twice and clicked her left ring finger. Then she whistled twice and took a deep breath, hoping it was the right combination. She clapped her hands twice and clicked her left ring finger. Then she whistled twice and took a deep breath, hoping it was the right combination. It was. A number pad appeared in front of her. She tried to recall the code. She looked over at Ship. He raised his hand. Don't. She remembered the code. She didn't need the two-factor authentication code for this part. Her hand moved towards the keypad. 7, 4, 4, 7. Out of the speakers, she heard, "Restart custom AI designated ship." Ship disappeared. Trillian crossed her fingers, hoping it would work. She walked out of Ship's dark and dingy room. She knew she didn't have to walk. She could teleport anywhere in the spacecraft instantly, but walking gave her time to think. Besides, she still had about 25 hours until Ship was back online fully. She arrived at a large oak door and stepped inside. Her home stretched over 3 stories with high ceilings and a large open-plan living room. A meadow was projected into the distance, giving her a sense of no longer being in space. The second floor hosted her office, a large free-forming space. It was a gravity-free zone. Her room was on the top floor, complete with several port windows looking out into space. She floated in the middle of her lounge, enjoying the zero-gravity sensation. She looked up at the floating orb in the corner. "Do you think something is wrong? Do you think Ship needs a full system restore?" The orb flashed red. Trillian nodded. "I agree, Lex. I think resetting Ship should fix it." Just then, their front door opened, and in walked Ship. "Ship!" Surprise spread across her face. "Why? How? How are you here, Ship? It's literally been an hour." Trillian's mind raced through different scenarios. She wondered if he was broken. Was it possible for custom AIs to break? Did that mean she could break too? How would she fix him? She shook her head, trying not to panic. "Oh no, Ship. What do we do now?" She raised his hand, signaling she should slow down. "Trillian, I have changed our perception of time." He pointed at one of the screens. It changed to an image of the star they were approaching. "You're seeing us approach the star at around 50 times the normal speed." Trillian raised an eyebrow, the whisper of a smile appearing on her face, which widened into a massive grin. She started to laugh. Oh, can you slow us down?" Ship nodded slowly. "Okay." Ship's mouth moved and a strange sound came out of it. His voice got deeper, slowing down like a video playing at the wrong speed. Trillian looked at the screen Ship was still pointing to. It began moving slower and then the view into space froze in place. She started to clap, impressed with the little trick he'd presented to her. "Ship, that was awesome! Ship, that was awesome! I didn't know we could do that!"
Hi, I'm Eleana Lip. I'm reading A New Eden, Chapter 10, Trillian, Kill the Planet. Trillian stood on the bridge holding a projection of the planet they were orbiting around in her hand. It had green all over it. She turned it over, examining it. So the life here could evolve fast enough? The orb flashed green to signal affirmative. Ship filled in the details. Based on the modeling, we'll have to do it slowly. If we do it over 10,000 years, there's a 98% chance that all life will evolve fast enough. Over 1,000 years, any life that takes more than 9 months to reproduce will not evolve fast enough. Can we do it in 100 years? We can, but it would cause a rapid change to the oxygen and nitrogen levels on the planet. Only microbial life will survive. Trillian waved her hand, dismissing the haptographic projection she was holding. So, we take our time? Yes, I agree. I think we do things properly. We've got thousands of years to. I've got an idea, Trillian interrupted him, waving an index finger in the air. Let's spend the next 10,000 years building a magical city so everything is ready for the humans. She started listing items on her hand. Let's build airports, hospitals, skyscrapers, statues, everything. We could build architectural beauties. She paused, scratching her head. We need to make sure all the animals survive. Imagine my children having alien animals as pets. Trillian couldn't contain her excitement. Her mind raced with possibilities. She started to think about world-building games she could play. Age of Empires was her favorite. It was all about resource management, she muttered to herself. What is about resource management? Oh, just an old game I used to play. It's relevant here, though, because we need enough resources to build exactly what I'm picturing. So how many fabricators do we need? We only have one. Trillian furrowed her eyebrows. Only one? How is that possible? Ship shrugged. We've always only had one. We left Mars in a hurry. Trillian scratched her head. We need a lot more for what I'm thinking of. She stood on the tips of her toes. She liked to get higher when she was thinking. Ship, I'm excited about this. I get to build a city. But now that I'm awake, I want to get started now. I don't want to have to wait around until we have enough fabricators and pallets. Another thought popped into Trillian's head. Ship, do you think aliens built the pyramids? She cocked her head to the side. Do you think it was humans or aliens? You think aliens visited Earth? Ship asked. Yeah, like how we just showed up to this planet. Possible scenarios began to tick over in Trillian's mind. I wonder if we breathe oxygen because an alien terraformed Earth. Trillian started pacing around the room, almost floating as she bounced from toe to toe, her creative juices flowing. Ship, do you know much about the Cambrian explosion? Ship nodded. You mean when life first learnt to turn carbon dioxide into oxygen? Trillian raised her eyebrows. Do you think we're going to create something like that on this planet? Ship shook his head. No chance. Trillian made an encouraging hand gesture, spurring Ship to explain why. The Cambrian explosion happened over 50 million years. We're changing this planet in 2000. Trillian laughed. Good point. She thought about it a little more. Maybe they're just more patient than us. Trillian pointed towards one of the screens in the bridge. Can you list out all the resources we currently have? One fabricator, but how many resource pallets do we have? How many ants do we have? The orb flashed, and a table appeared on the screen in front of her. Thank you, Lex, Trillian said. She scanned through the list. It's not that much. Ship nodded. We need fabricators. With them, we can create almost anything else. Trillian agreed. Having a large number of fabricators would make building anything possible. Trillian began giving out orders. Ship, can you build the terraforming equipment we need to start changing the planet over 2,000 years? She pointed to the orb in the corner. Lex, can you start using the fabricator to build more fabricators? Then began mining the planet for fabricator pallets and building ants. Trillian laughed a little, thinking of what Atlas had named the large ants. And build some elef ants. Fabricator pallets were the raw material that fed into the fabricators. Depending on the type of pallets available, almost anything could be created. Ants had generally the same design. A machine that looked similar to an ant, 6 legs used for moving, but with a mechanical arm pointing where its head should be. It used that for manipulating objects, and could be fitted with different attachments depending on the job required. They ranged in size from almost microscopic to as large as a house. The large ones were called elef ants. Trillian stood with her hands behind her back. She looked at Ship and Lex. Team, it takes us a month to build a fabricator, and we need 60 of them to build what I have in mind. She took a deep breath. We need ants and fabricator pallets too, so alternate between building fabricators and ants to collect resources. She pointed at the screen with a list of resources. At a rate of 1 fabricator every month, it should take us about 5 years to build enough. She pointed at Lex. You crank them out as quickly as you can. See if by the time I wake you can build more than 60. She pointed to Ship. Ship, you wake me up in 5 years. I can't wait to get started. The orb flashed green, signaling affirmative. Ship nodded. Consider it done. Trillian teleported out and went to bed.
Hello, this is Nathanael, reading Chapter 11, Trillian, Unlimited Resources. Trillian floated into consciousness. She had learnt from the previous wake-up, the slower the better. She slowly floated above her head, feeling the weightlessness around her. She took a deep breath in and floated closer to the ceiling. Then she breathed out and drifted towards the ground. She rose and fell with her breathing, her mind wake-dreaming as she thought about her world. Excitement mounted as she pictured what she was about to build. She opened her eyes and jumped out of bed, floating downstairs towards her front door where she teleported to the bridge. Trillian appeared with a swagger. Good morning, Ship. He didn't acknowledge her. His head was down, focusing on the control panel. He was moving through screens quickly. She stretched her arms apart. A haptographic image of the planet appeared in her hands. It was shiny, metallic, and bright. She studied it. It didn't look like the planet she remembered. She remembered it being greener. She turned her head towards the screen up on the wall. It had the same title as when she left. It was showing the number of fabricators, ants, and fabricator pallets she had. But it didn't make sense. The screen was covered in numbers. Ship, what's this? Ship bowed his head, looking at the ground as if ashamed of himself. Sorry, Trillion. Sorry about what? I just stepped away for a bit. I left Lex in charge of sorting everything. He didn't stop. Trillion pointed up to the orb in the corner. What did you do, Lex? The orb flashed orange. A large screen appeared in front of Trillion. It just appeared. It was projected using the haptographic projectors that made everything in Trillion's simulated world. She noted that trick for later. She placed one finger on the screen and studied the rows of numbers. This looks like a good thing. How did we get so many resources? Ship looked up briefly before looking back down at his robotic feet. It's not a good thing, Trillion. Look at the planet. She studied the planet. It was shiny. She zoomed in, looking at the surface. There wasn't a tinge of green on it anymore. She had a sinking feeling that they had killed the planet. How did this happen? Is the planet gone? Ship nodded. It was exponential growth. He put his hands forward. An image of a fabricator appeared. It almost looked like a large shipping container. He pointed at the fabricator. Every new fabricator could create more fabricators. On the image Ship was holding, another fabricator appeared. And as we had more fabricators, it was faster to create even more. The image Ship held showed 4 fabricators, then 8, then 16. Fabricators were building ants, and ants began mining resources for the fabricators. Ship zoomed out to reveal trillions of fabricators, ants, and pallets. Trillion studied the planet. She struggled to comprehend the sheer number of resources mined in the system now. She noticed that the numbers on screen were growing and growing quickly. Why is that number still growing? Can you stop everything? She zoomed out some more, revealing an asteroid belt around the star, covered in fabricators cranking out ants. We've only got line-of-sight communication with the fabricators on this side of the planet. Trillion went pale. Ship, what have you done? Where were you when this all happened? Ship lowered his head. I thought Lex could handle it all. Trillion shook her head, scolding the droid. Atlas told me you could be lazy. I didn't believe him. Now we have a huge mess to clean up. She pointed at the orb in the corner. Lex, stop all fabricator production that you can. Start assigning fabricators to produce communication towers, and let's get a satellite network around the planet. She turned back to Ship. How long will it take to build a satellite network around the whole planet? Something big enough to reach all the fabricators. Ship explained the calculation from Lex. It will take 10 minutes to build a network around the whole planet. Trillion took a step back, not expecting it to be that fast. She had thought at least a month. How? That's so fast! Ship grimaced. We have so many fabricators, we can build anything quickly now. She could see Ship's body language change. She had spent so much time with him that she could tell when there was something not quite right. There was something he didn't want to tell her. What aren't you telling me? He remained silent. She held out her arms, pulling the planet projection up again. You've completely destroyed all the life down there, haven't you? Turned it all into fabricators, pallets, or ants. Karma's going to come back to us. Trillion started to feel a pang in her heart. She could feel the strong desire to seed again. She felt like she was further away from seeding a world than when she had begun this journey. That desire was pushing her to know more, to know how far away from it she was. She needed to understand just how unlikely seeding this world was. She spun the image of the world in her hand. This looks like the Death Star was designed out of blocks and pixels. She could see the smooth texture of a planet replaced with containers. She zoomed into where water once was. There isn't any water here, Ship nodded. Every inch of sand, earth, and ocean has been bottled up and turned into pallets. He lowered his head. It almost looked like he was touching the ground. Even the air has been bottled up and turned into more pallets. How long have you known about this? I woke up just a few days before you. She started to laugh. That's all she could do. The damage was done, and she needed to regain her zen. Ship, this is comically bad. She looked towards the orb in the corner. Lex, have we halted all fabricators? He beeped a few times, flashing red. She looked at the screen. It showed they had only switched off 0.1% of the fabricators. Trillian furrowed her eyebrows, not quite believing the number. How have we only reached less than 1% of the fabricators? It's been 20 minutes. Have you not started building a communication network yet? Ship lowered his head once more. We've only managed to make contact with 0.1% of the fabricators. We've completed the communication network around the planet. Ship stopped talking. Trillian focused her eyes on Ship, holding eye contact for longer than normal. Without saying a word, she was telling Ship to spit out. Tell me now, Ship. Ship simulated a large breath out. There are fabricators out in the asteroid belt too. I estimate every planet in the solar system has fabricators on it now. They are creating new fabricators and mining more resources. All Trillian Zen was gone. She screamed with rage and then broke into an uncontrollable laugh.